Thanks again for being with us. If you just walked in here, our band is laying low here, mostly out of caution with COVID, and so we're having a creative worship opportunity this weekend, which is fun. But thanks for being with us, and we've been in a series over the last handful of weeks now, all about wisdom and really what wisdom looks like, and really specifically in the book of Proverbs. We've been camping out there, and we said Proverbs is a kind of a unique place in the Bible, in that there's a lot of short little statements that the whole book is built around, at least most of the book is built around, and all of those statements are kind of general statements of reality, right? They're kind of, we call them truisms, that if all things are kind of normal, this is how things are, is usually how Proverbs are presented. And again, they're super practical, they're very helpful, and within the Proverbs, we find, like I said, a ton of wisdom. And we said we want to be people of wisdom if we value in any way becoming effective at relationships, becoming effective at our jobs, or any pursuit that we're going to have. We're going to need wisdom. And so all of us actually, whether we realize it or not, we want wisdom. We need wisdom. We need to have it show up, to have the kind of peace and harmony and satisfaction that comes with doing things well and loving well. So we've been using this definition throughout the course of this series. We said wisdom is the art of loving and living well, right? The art of loving and living well. And of course, all of that is rooted in a life that is Christ-centered and focused, of course, on Jesus and his kingdom. And so we've been talking over the last bunch of weeks about what is wisdom, what is foolishness, what does that look like, what does it look like to have great friendships, and what's a wise life encased in when it comes to people as far as our close and friends. And then last weekend we talked about words, what's coming out of our mouth, right, which is ultimately the overflow of our heart. We had a conversation that way as well. And I would just encourage you, if you haven't connected yet or maybe heard some of those messages, you can catch up on our YouTube channel if you want. You can just watch, connect there, or our website, and get caught up to any of those conversations if you missed those. Of course, each of those you can listen to or watch there. And then this weekend, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into a conversation about finances. The Proverbs and wisdom literature, which is a big chunk of the Bible, talks a lot about money. And before you freak out and say, is the church just going to ask me for money the whole time? We're not going to do that. We're going to talk about what is wisdom when it's applied to this portion of our life, this area of our life. And I'm just going to be honest, I'm going to walk you guys through my journey a little bit because when I was studying the Proverbs over the years, over the last 20 years since I first got introduced to the Bible, I've been a little bit fascinated, a little confounded about the way that finances are talked about, specifically in this book, but all throughout the Bible a little bit. Because sometimes the Bible is going to talk about finances this way, specifically when it relates to kind of what kind of financial situation we're in. Sometimes it sounds like, when you're reading the Bible, that to be poor is kind of a good thing. Sometimes when you're reading the Bible, it sounds like when you're not poor, when you're rich, it's a good thing. Sometimes it sounds like people who have made really bad choices or done evil things are poor. And sometimes it sounds like people who have made bad choices or done really evil things are rich. Right? And you're like, man, how does this thing work? How does it work with poverty and riches and finances? What is wisdom when it relates to money? And so we're going to talk about this on kind of a high-level look of our financial standing and what the Bible would say about it, and maybe a little bit of encouragement or direction wherever we find ourselves on kind of the financial map. The Bible has something to say to us about that. And so I know money is a hot topic for probably all of us, a lot of us. So I'm going to tread carefully, but of course faithfully to what Scripture would say. And I think this little picture we're going to paint today, I think is going to be helpful for all of us as we start to unpack it a little bit, because there's a lot of wisdom to be had in the arena of finances. Okay, so let's dive into it a little bit. But before I even put a verse on the screen, I just want to start by creating a little bit of a grid here. We're going to pull this over and walk this through. So we're we're going to look at kind of what the Bible has to say to those who are quote unquote poor. Actually, let's start here. We'll start with foolish and wise, and what the Bible is going to say to those who are rich and poor, quote unquote. And let me talk to this just for a minute before we even unpack these anymore. So the person who is poor or rich in the Bible, and that's often the language that's going to be used, is probably not the same picture that you and I would have when I hear those words, right? So I know there's some danger in even me writing those down because we're going to jump to, when you hear rich, you think Bezos and Musk or whoever you have in your mind of like billionaires, of people who are really, really rich. And I don't know what you think of, right, with poor, but maybe you think people who are, maybe you think of yourself as poor. Maybe you think of people who have very, very little are poor. The way the Bible is going to talk about rich and poor is the understanding, the underpinning of culture at that time was a survival culture. So if you had enough to survive for quite a while, you're rich. If you didn't, you're poor, right? If you had to struggle to survive and have your needs met, poor. If you had most of your needs and some of your wants met, you're rich. And of course, there's a range of what rich meant. But probably by that definition, most of us historically, if we looked about how people stand financially and we looked kind of across time, most of us probably have enough to qualify for being in the rich category biblically. If that helps you to think this through. If you have a car and if you've never really wondered where a meal's going to come from, if you have a closet full of clothes and you got multiple sets of shoes to pick from, biblically, you're rich, right? And I'm rich. And I feel uncomfortable, probably all of us do, probably picking either of these to land on. But the reality is that's kind of how the Bible is going to talk about wealth and finances is if I have plenty to last on and live on, I'm going to be in the category of rich. So hopefully that's helpful even before we jump into it. So let me talk first about what does this look like because there can be a person who is both rich and foolish. Let's talk to that just a little bit. So here's going to be the first one, Proverbs 15:27. Here's what the writer of Proverbs says: the greedy bring ruin to their households, but the one who hates bribes will live, right? The greedy will bring ruin to their households, but the one who hates bribes will live. So first we're going to take a look at this person, and we're going to say the foolish person who has a lot of resources are partially going to be marked by greed. And that greed, that longing to have more and more and more and more and to hoard and to gather and to gain is going to cause them to compromise their values and their morals. They're going to be people who are going to be able to be bought with a bribe, right? Makes sense? The greedy bring ruin to their households, but the one who hates bribes, that would be the opposite of the foolish person, will live. The greedy loves and is open to bribes. They're open to being bought off. The way that it would probably show up for us is somebody who's rich and foolish or wants to be rich and are in a foolish place would think in terms of, man, I would do anything for that amount of money. If you had enough money, if I could have that lifestyle, I would do about anything. I'd bend the rules. I'd lie. I'd cheat. I'd do whatever it takes to get that. And the Bible would say you're going to land in a place of ruin in your household because your integrity is going to be broken. Make sense? And like I said, just like last week, we're going to walk through a bunch of verses. So maybe make a few notes along the way in your phone or on if you're taking notes physically, and jot these passages down because they're loaded. I'm going to give you a few more for the category of the foolish and the rich. One who oppresses the poor to increase his wealth, and the one who gives gifts to the rich, both come to poverty. Both come to poverty. Fascinating. So the person who oppresses and smashes down the poor, to increase their wealth. The person who takes advantage of, sees the ignorance of, and they try to squeeze finances out of them, that they're going to come to ruin. They're foolish, they're oppressive. And it says the one who gives gifts to the rich, the person who's constantly trying to get into favor with those of high standing. It says both these people foolishly are trying to take a shortcut through oppression and through flattery, right? Through trying to gain for themselves, ultimately from greed. And it says what's interesting is they both come to poverty. It's actually, they're going to find themselves in a place where the very thing that they want is what they're going to lose. They're going to land somewhere different on the map. Fascinating verse. And remember, these are truisms. They tend to land this way. Doesn't always play perfectly. These aren't promises. But they're saying, in general, the person who's oppressive, the person who's sucking up to the rich, ultimately, they're going to find themselves kind of in the poorhouse. Here's the next one, Proverbs 21:6. A fortune made by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a deadly snare. Wow. So the person who is through misrepresenting a product or a service, right, or selling lies through a lying tongue, that person, it says their fortune is temporary. And that fortune is going to become a snare to them. It's going to trap them. In fact, all throughout the Bible, you're going to get this idea that wealth, riches, it's a dangerous thing. It has a power to it. In the New Testament, it would say that those who have the love of money have pierced themselves with many evils, with many snares, right? They've been captured by those things. It's a fleeting vapor. It's a deadly snare. And the deceit, again, we looked at this a little bit last week. I'm fascinated by how all these things tie together. When we're looking at foolishness and wisdom, it's interesting to me that constantly lying and greed and the use of foolishness are all kind of connected together. So, right, that we could put a bunch more words, but here's kind of the idea of the foolish rich person, the person who's found themselves with wealth. Maybe it's happened very quickly, but probably it's happened inappropriately through misusing our tongues or our motivations. It's been about greed and gathering, not about helping or serving anyone in the process, right? So there's kind of a snapshot of the foolish rich. And in our culture today, we would see this show up in get-rich-quick schemes all over the place. You know, watch this YouTube video and you'll have a Lambo by the end of these 10 minutes, right? That kind of thought process, you're like, I'm not sure that's how it works, right? That's foolishness. I want to recognize that the temptation to have a lot for very, very little, to take advantage of others, or through deceit to gain much is a dangerous place to be biblically. The Bible would say that's foolishness, right? It's foolishness. Now, what's super interesting is not only is the rich person who lands in this foolish quadrant in kind of a dangerous place, there's also a place to look here where this person is foolish yet poor. Foolish yet poor. Sometimes it's because this person has been rich and landed himself here in the poorhouse, so to say, because of choices like the Proverbs we just saw. But let me give you a few more. Proverbs 11:24. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly and comes to poverty. One person is generous. They give freely. Right? Another withholds. They're stingy. They're hoarding. And because of the fact that they're withholding unduly, they come to poverty. Maybe they were here in this place, and now they've landed here where they're both foolish and poor. Because generosity isn't what marked them, because what was in their heart was more and more greed, right? More and more for themselves always. And we're going to see here in a minute, it's not that it's a bad thing sometimes to have a little bit, but when that is what consumes and drives and generosity isn't present, super dangerous, right? Because they've withheld unduly. Let's look at the next one. Oh, I love this. Proverbs 24, I love this word right here. Sluggards. Isn't that a great word? Sluggards. I think we should bring that back. I like that one a lot. Sluggards do not plow in season, so at harvest time they look but find nothing. Right? Proverbs 20, verse 4. So we're saying sometimes the foolish, this person is painted foolishly. The sluggard would fall into that category there, and the idea here is that just there was an opportunity to do work, there was an opportunity to create income, and that opportunity wasn't taken advantage of. They were lazy when they should have been diligent. That's the idea. And it says, at harvest time, when you're supposed to be reaping what you've sown, there's nothing to reap because the sowing didn't happen. In the Bible, the Proverbs are going to say that's a foolish place to be. Right? It's a foolish place to be. When there's opportunity to work and to be diligent, sometimes there is a lazy attitude, or sometimes there has been a greed as well, even though there has been potentially riches in the past. This verse is powerful in that it calls us to a diligent mindset and a diligent heart set. That when I think about the opportunities in front of me, I want to recognize that I want to work hard while I can. So what do you mean by that? If I'm in a place, right, where I don't quite have what I need to function, I don't quite have enough to represent kind of the family that God has given me, there's an opportunity to work diligently. If you have your health, if we have opportunity, we can give ourselves to hard work. And as we're going to see in a minute, God rewards that kind of diligence in many ways. We'll see how that plays out. Here's the next one. Proverbs 21:17. This is interesting. Whoever loves pleasure will become poor. Whoever loves wine and olive oil will never be rich. Right? And all the time, the Proverbs keep casting these two things against each other. Rich and poor and rich. And again, sometimes poverty almost... sometimes riches is condemned, and we're going to see that, right? We saw that certainly in the foolishness. But here, it's kind of, it's almost praised. And let me just stop here and make this clear, because in our culture, the prosperity gospel is something that we want to be very careful with. We do not believe in the prosperity gospel, which goes like this, in essence. God wants you to be healthy, happy, and rich, and if you believe in him, you are always going to be those things. And if you give a little bit, God's going to give all kinds of stuff to you, and none of that's guaranteed, and none of that's promised. Primarily, God came to save us and rescue us and bring us into relationship with him, right? That's the nature of why Jesus came. He came to live perfectly and die innocently and pay for our sins. And he's going to teach us how to live wisely in this time. We're going to see here in a minute, sometimes that has an impact financially and sometimes it doesn't. But here's the promise here in Proverbs 21. Not the promise, the truism is whoever loves pleasure will become poor. Whoever loves wine and olive oil will never be rich. Here's the idea is if I'm indulgent, if I make income and then I take that income and I'm always spending it on my own desires, I'm never setting any aside, never saving any, but I'm always using all that I have. That's the idea of loving pleasure, loving wine and olive oil. Obviously, the Bible is going to say that every good and perfect gift comes from above. James says that. God gives gifts to his children. He wants us to eat food and enjoy that, right? He wants us to enjoy normal things of life within reason and within a context. If I'm outspending my means, if I'm living on, if I'm spending more than I'm making, or if I'm spending everything that I'm making, the Bible is just going to plain out say, in general, you're basically going to always be hand to mouth. That's the idea. And there's a foolishness to that because life is long and emergencies come and age comes. And so we want to think that all the way through. All right, so here's kind of the foolishness side of it. Often there's greed that is going to mark this. There's sometimes a lack of diligence here. Sometimes there's a shortcut path that's taken here where I want to get rich quick or take advantage of other people in order to get much. Now, what's interesting is that sometimes the Bible is going to paint the picture of the poor person who's also wise. The poor person who's also wise. Those who don't have very much, but have a lot of wisdom. And there's a bunch of reasons why that might happen. Let's look at a few of them here. Proverbs 13:23. An unplowed field produces food for the poor, but injustice sweeps it away. There's this fascinating set of laws in the Old Testament. They go like this. If you had a farm, what you were supposed to do is farm that thing, right? You're supposed to farm it and take care of it, but you were supposed to leave kind of the edges of that farm for the poor. And that the edges of that farm were to be the opportunity that the poor had to be diligent and to be fed and to begin to get traction in life financially. The person who doesn't plow the field produces, right? An unplowed field produces food for the poor. The injustice sweeps it away is the idea that the rich fool doesn't leave anything for the poor. They take advantage of the opportunity that the poor person had. Is this making sense? That they took the very work and the very opportunity that the wise poor would have been experiencing. So sometimes people are in this situation because of injustice. They had been taken advantage of. They had been hurt. They had been used by the rich. And sometimes that is the reason for the poor who is also wise, following godly principles and following godly instruction, yet taken advantage of in an imperfect and fallen world. Here's another reason. Proverbs 28:6, better the poor whose walk is blameless than the rich whose ways are perverse. Right? So this one is powerful, that there's just a flat-out place for the person who has integrity. It's better to be in their situation, to land in a place of integrity and land in a place where I'm not going to be willing to compromise my actual beliefs, rather than to become rich and have a perverse or a distorted way about me. And sometimes it's going to be the case. Sometimes through faithfulness to God, an opportunity is lost. I've talked to many people throughout my time in ministry. People did not get the promotion that they thought they were going to get because probably their faith was a point of persecution for them. It's a real thing. Where maybe the opportunities that other people would have been presented, they didn't have presented to them because of their integrity was remaining intact. And this is a tough one. This is a tough one because in a perfect world, this person would have been able to have good things and enjoy them, have opportunities for their family, have opportunities to be generous. But sometimes those situations are broken through the fallenness and brokenness of our world. Sometimes you do everything right, so to say, and still at a time can be here. And let me say this, none of these are static. What means I don't know if anybody's in one of these situations forever and ever. They're places that we might find ourselves, right? You might be starting off in life and be just beginning to have your first job, and you might say, I'm kind of hand to mouth right now. I'm learning how to put wisdom into practice. Or sometimes it's because somebody was taken advantage of. Now, what also can happen is as someone practices integrity over time, they can find themselves both wise and quote-unquote rich. Now, the Bible is going to warn against both, hear this, about both severe poverty and severe wealth. Extremes. The Bible is going to have a lot of warnings for both of those extremes we're going to see in a little bit. But at a moderate level, this is how this kind of plays out. Let's look at what the Proverbs would say about the wise rich. Lazy hands make for poverty. We see that here. But diligent hands bring wealth. In general, what the writer of Proverbs is saying is the person who works hard, stays the course, stays at it, if they don't run into injustice or loss because of their own integrity, that can happen, that in general, they're going to find themselves with a little more than they had before, as a truism in life, okay? Just talking that way, right? This person, slowly but surely, is going to gather a little bit because of their diligence. Here's the next one. Proverbs 8:18. This is wisdom speaking. With me are riches and honor, enduring wealth and prosperity. So what the writer of Proverbs is saying is that in general, wisdom often is going to cause this to be the default. Right? If you get wisdom, it's going to help you, among many other things, to have a solid financial picture. Right? Hear that. Even more so than enduring wealth. When they heard that, they heard solid financial picture. Like they had a savings account. And they had a little bit set aside for retirement. And they had right, this would be our mindset, is that a solid financial picture, which I'll tell you, especially if you're leading a family right now. If you're a single mom or you're a young father leading a family, having the goal of having a solid financial picture so that your home might be lived in peace is a fine goal to have. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're not saying I want to be greedy. I'm not looking for a Lambo or a get-rich-quick scheme. You're saying I'd like to have us not be in chaos and panic mode all the time. That is a fine, God-honoring goal to lead your family and to provide for them in that way. Or as a young person, to set your life up in such a way that you can be generous in the future, right? That all those are fine, solid, God-honoring goals if your heart is set into the right place. Here's the next one. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Right? So one of the things that marks the wise rich is their generosity. Their generosity. Right? That this person, part of what God is doing in giving them resources is God knows that this person is going to give resources to other people that are going to be able to help and foster and nurture and do good kingdom work with those things. Now, I want us to see all this because there's a lot going on here. And at the end of the day, like we said, there's extremes that the Bible would warn against. Extreme desire for wealth is going to be super dangerous. Being in extreme poverty is going to be very, very dangerous. Look at this verse with me real quick. I love this and I'm very challenged by it in a lot of ways. Proverbs 30:7-9. 2 things I ask of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. And then listen to this one. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God. This idea that these extremes are kind of avoided, and in general, the focus of our culture in our day often is going to be like this, right? We're often going to feel the pressure to do this, to go from poor to rich, right? That's going to be often going to be the focal point in our culture and what we're going to hear in our messaging. What the Bible is going to say is this is not the focus. The focus is going from here to here, from foolish to wise. What will that wisdom get me? I don't know. You You and I might land here, or we might land here. We might be here for a while and then be here, or be here for a while and land here. And like Paul, who says, I've learned the secret of being content, right? In any and all circumstances, right? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. The person who lands in general in a place where saying, God, you are my prize, you are my joy. Whatever you want to put into my hands, I'm going to be faithful with that. I'm going to follow you. And I think a few things I want us to hear here, especially if maybe you've landed here and wondered, am I doing something super wrong? Have I blown something up? God sees you and he knows the situation, especially if you've held to integrity and suffered loss because of it. God knows that and he honors that, and you will be rewarded for that. If you have faith in Jesus and you love Christ and you have held to your faith and suffered loss for it, that will all be righted and rectified in the end. So some of you may be here and you may be wondering, is it okay that I have a little bit of solid financial standing, maybe even some wealth? Here's what I would encourage you to know. Right, if you're finding yourself here, the landing point for you is to always focus on gratitude and always focus on generosity. We have to be honest with ourselves. The resource that we have, and many of us are going to fall into some version of this category, there's always going to be a temptation to drift towards wanting to do this more and more and more. And the antidote to that is generosity. And this is not about giving to the church. Generosity is often simply giving to the poor, giving to my fellow man. That's the idea. If you don't give to grace, that is between you and Jesus, right? It's a whole other conversation. This is about being generous and freeing my heart from my money. This one, what I need here is perspective that life is not just what's happening on the planet. Life is going to go beyond this lifetime into the next. Trying to find contentment and joy with what God has given me, and knowing that he's going to right the wrongs, whether in this life or in the life to come. Now, what do I do if I'm here? And if you're here and you're honest and you're finding yourself in one of these categories, first of all, you've already taken a step towards wisdom. If you found yourself and go, man, I'm kind of lazy. I'm like, you know what? You are already finding wisdom. If you just admitted that to yourself, congratulations, that's amazing. If you said to yourself, man, I am kind of greedy. Congratulations, you have found honesty and wisdom, right? And we can look at our own hearts, and at times we're all going to wrestle with this to some degree, right? These are not fixed. We're going to slide back and forth between some of these. If I'm here, what I need to find, if you have resources but have gotten them illegitimately, the Bible would call this ill-gotten gain, is the way the Bible describes it. What you want to do is find integrity. Get integrity. There's a guy named Zacchaeus in the Bible. He had a lot of wealth, and then he came to know Jesus, and then he's like, oh, man, I stole all this money from people in it, the short version, right? He's like, I got to make a bunch of stuff right, and he did that. He made the wrongs right. He went back and paid what he owed. He fixed it. If I'm here, making a decision to right the wrongs is very, very God-honoring. It's incredibly impactful, and it will send an incredibly loud message about your faith and about the kind of God that you serve. All right, I might find myself here and say, man, why am I in this place? Why don't I have better opportunities? Why haven't I moved more over my lifetime? And if I'm here, I might have to find diligence. What do you mean by diligence? The way that the Bible, and we might talk some more about this here in the weeks to come, the way that the Bible is going to talk about opportunity and responsibility is it is a gift. It is a gift. It is a thing to be honored and treasured that we have the opportunity to do good and to put our hand to the plow, is the way that the Bible would say it. So we might look and say, man, it's been 10 years or 15 years, and I'm not where I thought I would, but I kind of squandered time. If you're there, don't beat yourself up. It doesn't do anything, right? Don't look back and say, well, I wasted it, it's gone. Look and say, the opportunity is ever before me to move towards wisdom, to find wisdom, to become a person of diligence. Guys, and hear me, sometimes it's not even laziness. Sometimes we believe that God can't do very much with us. This is one of the most heartbreaking things to me. Sometimes we believe because what someone said to us, what someone felt about us, that we weren't smart enough or good enough or blah, blah enough, that we can't contribute much here on the planet, so I might as well just play some video games for the next 50 years. I might as well just smoke some cigarettes and watch some TV and drink a little bit. Just kind of ride my days out. Listen, what I'm about to say has absolutely nothing to do with money. What I want you to know is that God does not view you that way. He does not look at you and say, you're dumb, you're an idiot, you can't amount to anything, you can't produce, you can't contribute anything. He would look at you and say, I sent my son to the planet to make you my son or my daughter. And I have vision for you. I have intention for you. I believe more for your life's investment than you could even imagine. Sometimes we land here out of, maybe even drifting into both of the, out of fear that God could use me. Right? This whole board has far less to do with money. And ultimately, what I want to do is find wisdom. God will take care of this. That's his problem, not mine. Right? He's the one that shakes that all out. What I want to do is find myself seeking first the kingdom and his righteousness, right? And all these things are going to get taken care of along the way. Wisdom, according to the Bible, right, is going to show up powerfully in our finances. And a lot of times, finances magnify our character. So here's the question for us today. Coming out of this conversation, where do I need to land? What's my go run with it moment with the Lord? Right? Is it increased generosity that I need to see that what I have is not mine, it's the Lord's? Is it increased integrity? I need to go make it right. Is it increased diligence? I need to see what God has placed in front of me and believe what he said about me. Or is it increased perspective? God, I'm in a difficult place, or maybe a place that's challenging, or maybe I'm just perfectly content right where I am, and I'm going to just live in peace and say, God, thank you for what you've provided for me, whether great or small. What's that landing point maybe for you today? And ultimately, we want to find Christ in the midst of all of that, seeking his kingdom with whatever we have. Guys, we're going to sing here in a minute, but I'd love to pray and have you pray with me and hear God's heart more and more for us today. Father, I want to say thank you for clarifying, God, and adding perspective for all of us, Lord, because our hearts are deceptive. And Lord, I know that in me there's a longing often for independence, that I want to live my own way. And Lord, you teach us and you draw us to dependence, to lean into you, to look to you for our daily needs. So would you teach each of us today, God, to live that way, to look to you for our provision, for our guidance, for our way of wisdom, that we might honor you with all that we do. Meet us here, Lord, even now.